Aloha, I'm Aja Eyre with the Maui Pono Network weekly update, and this is the week of December 4th. I'm sure that you have been riveted by the news. There have been all sorts of news stories coming out over the last couple of weeks, especially this week. Maybe you got that surprise announcement yesterday about the merger of Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines, which is everybody can't stop talking about that. Other things that have come up in the news are the mayor's plans or suggestions of plans for meeting the crisis that we have with housing, partially because of the Lahaina fires, but also just a housing crisis that's been there for a while. So we're going to talk about that. Not going to talk about the airlines merger. And we're hoping to bring up, highlight some news that maybe you missed as well that weren't covered in the newspaper articles. So let's start with some of the mayor's and the council members' ideas for one way of treating approaching the housing crisis because of the fires. And that is a suggestion that short-term rentals be converted to long-term rentals. So right now it's just a voluntary thing. And the mayor and the council have suggested that they look at amending the property taxes for people that switch to long-term rentals or corporations that switch to long-term rentals. There's some suggestions for signing bonuses, as I'm calling them. So let's get into that. So right now on your property, you can either be an owner-occupied property, you can be a non-owner occupied property, you can be a long-term rental, you can be a short-term rental. I'm just real simplifying it here. So those who are designated as short-term rentals or who are non-owner occupied residential properties of over $1 million, or this would also include timeshares, this would include condos. If the owners of those properties are willing to convert that property through an application process and through signing a lease of at least a year. In order to have a long-term rental, it has to be at least a year. So the law says you can rent for 6 months if you're not a short-term rental. So non-owner occupied houses that are not short-term rentals are often shorter term rentals. I mean, they're somewhere between 6 months and a year that they sign a lease for. That doesn't mean that they don't lease for a longer time, but they haven't switched to that 1 year minimum lease. So everybody who's not a long-term rental and is not an owner occupied and their homes are worth over $1 million, or they're a short-term rental, they can potentially say, okay, I'm willing to convert over to a long-term rental. And that means that their property taxes will be decreased significantly. They already are. So they've already passed some ordinances and laws that allow people who do long-term rentals to have a tax break that is equal to an owner-occupied home. So that's one thing that's already been there. So they not only did they get the property tax break from that, but they also get what I'm calling a signing bonus, which is a further decrease of property taxes for a while. And then they also get a subsidized rent. This is the proposal that the government and the other agencies, federal, state, and county agencies subsidize the rent that a person or family would be paying to stay in those previously short-term rentals or non-owner occupied homes. So to bridge the gap of what someone could be making per month in that vacation or short-term rental versus what they'd be making a long-term rental. So just for the math on this, this is very confusing, I think, if you haven't dealt with this before, but if you have a short-term rental and let's say it's a 3-bedroom, which would be pretty big for a short-term rental, but you can rent that short-term rental out based on its location for $300 to $600 a night. So some of the estimations I saw in the articles were that short-term rentals can make $10,000 a month. It's usually closer to like 5 to 7. But if somebody was making $10,000 to $12,000 a month with the property tax deduction, with that signing bonus, with the subsidies, they would be looking at like $5,000 to $7,000 a month. And so they'd still have to take a big decrease in their income. Anyway, is this going to incentivize people to do it? This is a good question. Right now it's a volunteer. The things that are being proposed are volunteer based. So we're asking you to do this. These are the incentives we're giving. You don't have to do it. There have been some calls for the use of eminent domain, which means that the governor or the mayor would come in and say, we need, because of emergency, to use your short-term rental or your timeshare, and we will compensate you, but we will use it. Now, the problem is that compensation actually has to be close to equal of what they would be getting otherwise. So that's a very expensive way to do eminent domain. It's not like the government can just come and take things over without providing compensation. So this is kind of this middle ground of trying to incentivize. Now, where I think that all the news is talking about, converting condos and timeshares, but where I think the big news here is actually that non-owner occupied homes. So I saw somewhere that it was like 30% of homes are just non-owner occupied. A lot of those are already being rented. Let's just be honest. We've all rented a home that's a non-owner occupied home and not a long-term rental. I mean, not all of us, but I think many of us. But if we could get these actually non-owner occupied, non-rented homes rented out, that might be the best way, because they're already not receiving income from it, but they would appreciate the property tax deduction. And perhaps that property tax deduction would be enough that it would allow them to go stay in a hotel when they usually come. So a lot of these non-owner occupied homes are second homes where people are using them just occasionally. And, maybe they'll be willing to use the money in a way that they still meet their vacation needs, but we're able to house people. So I'm hoping that good minds get together and talk about this and find a good way forward. The meeting where the council is actually talking about this further is on December 5th. So that is tomorrow. So if that's a Tuesday. So if you have a chance and have something you want to say, go ahead, go testify. If not, you can always watch the meeting after it happens to see what happens. I'm sure that the newspapers are going to cover that well, and we will be talking about it next week. So we're interested to see what happens with that. All right, going along to fire survivors and those that have been displaced and afflicted in the fires. We still have 7,000 people displaced. A large number of those are in somewhat temporary housing. A lot of people are still in hotels. We can't get good numbers on this, but from people who are actually working in the hubs that service the hotels are also housing a lot of their own workers. And we aren't sure if FEMA and Red Cross and the county and the state are covering the workers' rents, or if the hotels are covering the workers' rents, or there's a combination of that. Whatever's happening, there's a lot of people still living in hotels, which is really fun, I'm sure, for a couple weeks. And then it gets really hard because those are very small rooms, and you don't get to, you kind of, everybody goes to eat, cafeteria, goes back up to their room. School buses show up, drop the kids off. It's kind of a otherworldly thing to have all of these Maui residents living in the hotels. And the other thing that's been a challenge is there's been this kind of hotel eviction happening, relatively short notice, where they'll come in and say, okay, everybody needs to vacate all of these rooms in a couple days. And then a lot of people still don't have vehicles, and they've got to find ways to move their stuff, their family, their pets sometimes, into another hotel or another rental. And a lot of times they don't know where they're going. So there was a hotel shuttling that happened back on November 29th and 30th. There's another one happening just on December 12th. And so these people are being moved over to other hotels for three to 6 weeks. Very, very upending. And it's a lot more than what these people deserve to have to go through. It's very challenging. So what the government is saying is we do have the housing task force, the disaster resilience task force, and they're saying that people will guaranteed have a place to stay until February 2025. We're just hoping that there's so many people working on this and have a lot of opinions, and we're hoping we're able to find a path forward where we can give some stability to those who've lost so much and not keep asking them to be shuttled from here to there. There is also a lot of people are disgruntled about how FEMA has been handling this. There's a lot of people that have said, how are all these agencies supposed to coordinate? FEMA is not only providing disaster assistance, but they're also the property manager. They're kind of like the go-between. They're like the landlord of these places where they're housing people. And so it's a massive job, lots of criticism. They did have a big hiring fair, FEMA did, so we're hoping to see a lot more local people hired to work for FEMA who maybe understand the culture and the needs and the connections that people have here and are able to work that through. So while we've struggled with how the federal government has handled their assistance that they've offered, let's watch this closely, because maybe over the next 6 weeks, we're going to see an improvement, and it won't come soon enough for those who are dealing with temporary housing. All right, and finally, something that kind of went under the radar this week, Bill 38 was a bill that passed recently that is funding the pilot program for a Bill 50 that passed back in June. Now, Bill 50 is a program called the Ohana Assistance program that is giving $50,000 grants to property owners who have the space and the infrastructure to build an accessory dwelling unit, which we call Ohanas, or a second farm dwelling unit on their property. Now, it's great to pass bills like this. However, funding them is a whole nother deal. So it's not like you just pass it and then automatically people can come sign up and get $50,000 to go build an ohana on their property. It has to be funded. And what the council passed with this Bill 38 is to start a pilot program. So to fund the pilot program first, see if it works, see if it's sustainable, and then move that into the further unrolling of Bill 50. So we're going to watch this during budget season and see if it does get funding and what that pilot program is going to look like. And we'll get information out to you as that comes about. All right, so anything else that needs to be discussed, we ask you to please comment on our Facebook page or on the website. You can always go to mauipononetwork.org, and we have other videos. We have some interesting videos and articles about our favorite developer, just kidding, Peter Martin over in Lahaina. There's been some crazy articles that have come out, really kind of getting into the mind of what has led to a lot of the poor decisions that have been made over there. There's been some interesting articles about housing and displacement, interesting articles about council. We really encourage you to just, during this holiday season, try not to get in too many arguments, right, when we're meeting with family, but it's a good time to really open up discussions about what's happening with our county politics and our county government, because 2024 is just around the corner. And 2024 is an election year. We're going to see all those county council members up for election. We're going to see some major federal positions, of course, president coming up, and other state positions. So it's a good time to really understand where people have been putting their words, where they've been voting, how they've been voting, what they've been doing, get people interested in it. It's going to be a really raucous election year, I'm sure, especially with the disasters we've experienced over this last year. And we did get a little hint that we may have one of the presidential candidates here on island in January. So we're definitely going to be giving you more information as we find out more about that. So let's hope for that. Let's hope for more informed voters. And we hope this holiday season finds you happy and well cared for. And let's hope for some rain that comes in slow drizzles and not rain bombs, but helps us alleviate the drought that the island's been facing. But we're grateful for your attention and your efforts to learn more about what's going on in our county, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.